This is Kim Hammer with your devotion taken from the book of Judges, chapter 6. This is the account of Gideon being used by God in order to deliver the nation of Israel out from underneath bondage once again because they did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to verse 1. You remember when you were a kid and maybe your parents were trying to teach you a lesson or they were trying to get you to understand something? They might have said something along the line, "Are you not listening to me?" Or maybe you had to say that to your children, "Are you not listening to me?" It's usually at that point that you're trying to teach them something or you're trying to get them to understand something so that they won't either continue the mistake that they are making or they won't step off into a mistake that you don't want them to step into. Well, we find that when you take a look at Judges chapter 6, this is the fourth time that they did evil in the sight of the Lord. When you go over to Judges chapter 2, verse 11, that's the first time that the Bible records in Judges that they did evil in the sight of the Lord, and God gave them over to their enemies. From Judges chapter 2, verse 11, over to Judges chapter 6 and verse 1, we find that's approximately 150 years. When you go back and you do the math, you find that at least 35 years of that, they were in bondage to their enemy because they did evil in the sight of the Lord. Finally, they cried out and they asked God to deliver them. The one thing that is noteworthy in verse 2 is it says that God gave them over to their enemy. He didn't push them into their enemy. He didn't force them into their enemy's submission. Instead, we find that it says he gave them over to the enemy. God did that in order to teach them a lesson. You know, sometimes in life we find ourselves in a situation that we wonder why we're there. And when we begin to do the kind of inventory checkoff list of trying to figure out why it is that we're in the situation that we're in, some of the things that we do is we say, well, God, what did I do to find myself in this situation? Or we say, God, are you mad at me that you put me in this situation? You know, the best way to never have to ask those kind of questions is not to do anything evil in the sight of the Lord, because the only reason that we would find ourselves in that situation and God have anything to do with it is if we've done something that finally, after all he's been trying to do to teach us not to do those things, he finally says, fine, you want to be that way? I'm going to let you experience it. And God gives us over to it. Not because he wants to, but because that is the last resort in order to get us in a situation where finally we are willing to listen to him and we're willing to cry out to him. And that's what the nation of Israel did. Finally, they cried out to the Lord and they asked him to deliver them once again. And in verse 7, we find that God sent a messenger of truth, is what the Bible says. You know, that's what we need to hear whenever it's that we're in a situation that we have put ourselves into or that we force God to have to hand ourselves over into. Whenever we get to the situation that we're ready to get out of it, we need to be willing to listen to the messenger of truth that God sends our way. And what this messenger of truth told the nation of Israel was this. He said, I want to remind you on behalf of God that I brought you out of Egypt, that I delivered you out of slavery, that I drove out the enemy before you when I gave you the promised land, and that I told you that I am the Lord your God. But I also told you that you don't need to worship other gods. And then he made this statement. He says, but you have not listened to me. You know, I went back to that question a while ago. I said, did your parents ever say, are you listening to me? Generally, when we weren't listening to our parents who were trying to get us to do the right thing and not do the wrong thing, and we just kind of tuned them out, we did our own thing, that's when we found ourselves in trouble. And so it was with the nation of Israel, until finally God sent a messenger of truth that they asked for, and he finally said to them, are you not listening to what God is trying to tell you? You know, until we're willing to listen to what God is trying to tell us, don't get mad at God if he hands us over to a situation because we wouldn't listen to him up to that point.